That evening, at the Walker family's sprawling mansion in the suburbs of Dallas, I sat down for the first time with Ethan's mother. The atmosphere was elegant, warm golden lighting, the soft clink of wine glasses, everything felt perfect, until Gabriella placed a thick folder in front of me. She didn't smile, no small talk, just one cold sentence: prenuptial agreement. Sign it, if you truly love my son. I opened it. Page after page, clause after clause, every detail carefully designed to ensure that if anything ever went wrong, I would walk away with almost nothing. No assets, no rights, no voice, a trap, written in flawless legal language. Ethan sat beside me in silence. Maybe he thought it was just a formality. I looked up, meeting Gabriella's eyes. No reaction, no argument. I simply gave a faint smile and picked up the pen to sign. But what no one in that room realized was, I never sign anything I don't fully understand. If you want to know what really happened after that signature, comment 1 to hear the rest of the story, because what came next might change the way you see every power move forever. After I signed that prenup, everything seemed to become artificially smooth. Gabriella closed the folder and gave a smile that outsiders might read as satisfaction, but I knew better. It was the smile of someone who had just secured control over a variable. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. More wine was poured. Conversations drifted to Dallas real estate and their latest deals. Under the table, Ethan gently took my hand, trying to reassure me. "It's just a formality," he whispered. "Don't overthink it." I nodded, saying nothing. But in my mind, every clause from that contract was already replaying like code, clear, logical, and intentional. From that day on, Gabriella started appearing more frequently in our lives. Not as a mother, but more like a manager. She offered to review the apartment we were planning to buy in Austin, insisted that Ethan separate his accounts, and even sent me a list of suggestions on how to manage spending after marriage. No one said it out loud, but I understood perfectly. That prenup wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a carefully designed system of control. And I had just officially stepped inside it. I didn't react, I didn't argue, because the more I observed, the clearer it became. Gabriella didn't control people through emotions. She controlled them through systems. Every word she said, every suggestion she made, had a purpose. And me, I stayed quiet, went along with everything, as if I hadn't noticed a thing. But the truth is, from the very moment I put my signature on that prenup, I had already started reading her entire game. And this time, I wasn't the one being controlled. If you're starting to feel like something isn't quite right, leave a dot. In the days that followed, everything unfolded exactly as I had expected, but faster. Gabriella no longer kept that initial polite distance. She began stepping directly into our lives as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One morning, I received an email from her. The subject line was simple: financial structure proposal. Inside was a detailed breakdown: who would hold which accounts, monthly spending limits, even what she called my reasonable contribution to the marriage. That afternoon, when Ethan and I went to view a house in Austin, Gabriella was already there. She stood in the middle of the living room, pointing toward the window. "This one isn't suitable. The lighting isn't good for feng shui, and this neighborhood isn't high class enough." Ethan hesitated. I stayed silent. Every decision, big or small, started to pass through her. Where we would live, how we would spend, even whether I should continue my current job. Gabriella never gave direct orders. She simply offered reasonable explanations, enough to make Ethan believe it was all for the best. And little by little, I realized something. She didn't just want to control this marriage. She wanted to redesign it, in a way where I would never truly have any power in it. The peak of that so-called careful arrangement came one evening at the Dallas Country Club, where Gabriella had invited nearly all of her close friends and business associates. I walked in with Ethan, fully aware of the evaluating glances from people who had never met me, but had already heard about me through her version of the story. Dinner flowed smoothly until a woman across the table smiled and asked, "So, Lynn, what do you do?" Before I could answer, Gabriella spoke first, her tone gentle but loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Oh, she does some data-related work, more like IT support, nothing too complex." A few soft chuckles followed. No one meant harm, but it was enough to define me in their eyes. Ethan glanced at me as if he wanted to say something, but stayed silent. I looked at Gabriella. She raised her glass, her expression calm, as if she had just said something completely normal. And in that moment, I understood more clearly than ever. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was how she was shaping my image in her world. A woman who was good enough, but never enough to have a voice. And the most telling part was, I didn't correct her. I didn't push back. Because sometimes, letting someone believe they're in control of you is the best way to prepare for what comes next. After that evening, things didn't stop at polite introductions anymore. They moved into something far more concrete. Just 2 days after we left Dallas, Gabriella sent over another set of documents. Not a proposal, not a suggestion, an addendum to the prenup. I opened it. This time the terms were clearer, more direct. I would not be involved in any financial decisions related to Ethan's company. Any assets formed after the marriage, if connected to the Walker family's ecosystem, would not belong to me. In the event of a divorce, I would have no right to claim any share of joint investments. In simple terms, I would exist in this marriage, but never truly exist within their system. That night, Ethan handed me the documents. His voice hesitant. Mom just wants everything to be clear, to avoid problems later. I looked at him for a few seconds. No blame, no disappointment, just acknowledgement. Then I nodded. Fine. I signed. Again, no questions, no revisions. But this time, as I put the pen down, I wasn't just reading the game anymore. I had started playing it. After the second signing, the atmosphere between Ethan and me began to shift. Not through arguments, but through longer silences. He was still caring, still trying to keep things stable, but it was clear. He was caught in the middle. One evening in our apartment in Austin, Ethan asked a question he had probably been holding in for a while. Do you feel like this is going too far? I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, then at the stack of documents still sitting on the table. What do you think? I asked. Ethan said nothing. And that silence said everything. He didn't fully agree with his mother, but he wasn't decisive enough to stand on my side either. As for me, I didn't need him to choose right now, because I understood that some games can't be won with emotion. They can only be won with timing. I stood up, gathering the papers, my voice calm. I'm fine, really. But deep down, I knew. Every move they made, every decision they believed was protecting Ethan, was bringing everything closer to a point of no return. If you've ever felt pushed to the sidelines but stayed silent, waiting for the right moment, leave a comment too. After that evening, I didn't bring up the addendum or anything Gabriella had done. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Work, meetings, quiet dinners in Austin. But it was only on the surface. One afternoon, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I was sitting in front of my laptop, the screen split into multiple windows, contracts, data flow diagrams, and a set of terms nearly 40 pages long. I didn't hear him walk in until he was standing right behind me. What are you working on? I paused for a second, then angled the screen back toward myself. Just work. But he had already caught a glimpse, phrases like data liability, cross-border compliance, ownership structure. Ethan frowned. That's not the kind of IT support my mom was talking about. I gave a small smile. No, it's not. He pulled up a chair beside me and for the first time really looked at me, like he was trying to understand. Lynn, what exactly do you do? I didn't answer directly. I work with systems where one wrong clause can cost a company millions, or bring the whole thing down. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Ethan held my gaze longer than usual. Not with suspicion, but with the realization that there was a part of me he had never truly seen. And maybe he was beginning to understand I was never the one standing outside this game. The shift in Ethan's eyes after that afternoon was the clearest sign I noticed, but it wasn't enough to change how everything was operating. And then, the real turning point arrived. Ethan's startup officially entered its Series B fundraising stage, a critical deal that could shape the company's entire future. Gabriella stepped in immediately, no longer hiding her role. She took control of all legal matters, working directly with attorneys and major investment funds from New York. Meetings happened constantly, but I wasn't in any of them. Not because I didn't want to be, but because I wasn't invited. At one point, Ethan told me, "Mom thinks you don't need to be involved in this, it's too complicated." I just nodded. But that night, when Ethan accidentally left a draft contract on the table, I opened it. The clauses looked familiar, but the way they were structured together was flawed. Not a minor issue, a gap big enough to collapse the entire deal, if someone knew where to look. I closed the laptop without saying a word, because at that moment I was certain of one thing. This game was about to enter a phase none of them were truly prepared for. 2 days later, what I had anticipated happened, faster than anyone expected. One morning in Austin, Ethan received a call from one of the major investment funds in New York, their tone no longer as enthusiastic as before. Just a few minutes later, he hung up, his face visibly tense. The lead investor? They're considering pulling out. I didn't ask anything else. I already knew why. By the afternoon, the atmosphere in the apartment grew heavy. Ethan's phone kept ringing. Emails flooded in. An emergency meeting was scheduled that very night. Gabriella flew in from Dallas with her entire legal team. I wasn't in the meeting room, but I heard enough, through half-closed doors, through the strained voices echoing from the living room. There's an issue with the data transfer clause. The legal risk is too high if this deal goes through. We could face litigation if we sign under this structure. No one said it outright, but everything circled around the exact flaw I had already identified. The deadline remained 48 hours. If the contract couldn't be fixed, the deal would collapse. Not just the investment, but reputation, opportunity, and a cascade of consequences none of them were ready to face. I sat at the kitchen table, quietly staring at my dark laptop screen, because this time, they didn't just need a lawyer. They needed someone who understood exactly where the system was broken. That night, the small apartment in Austin was no longer a living space. It had turned into a temporary war room. Gabriella sat in the center of the living room, a laptop, documents, and phones spread out before her, like a chessboard entering its final phase. Her legal team dialed in non-stop from New York, their voices sharp, urgent. Ethan paced back and forth, jumping from one call to another. I had never seen him this unsettled. "We're missing something," one lawyer said. "We're not missing anything. The structure itself was flawed from the start," another shot back. Gabriella tightened her grip on the glass in her hand. For the first time, I saw her without complete control. "I need a clear answer," she said, her voice still cold, but no longer certain. "Can we fix this?" No one answered immediately. The silence stretched for a few seconds, but it was enough for everyone to understand. They were standing right on the edge of failure. I stood in the kitchen, just a few steps away. No one called my name, no one asked for my opinion, and that was exactly what made this moment clearer than ever. They had built a system where I had no place, but the irony was, that very system now needed me to survive. I stood there for a few more seconds, watching as everything slowly slipped out of their control. No one looked at me. No one thought I could be the answer. Then I stepped closer to the table, gently placing my laptop down. "The issue isn't the entire contract," I said, my voice steady enough for the whole room to hear. "It's Clause 7.3, cross-border data compliance." The room went silent. One of the lawyers turned to me. "Sorry, who are you?" Gabriella looked straight at me. No smile, no trace of control left. I opened the file and turned the screen toward them. "You're allowing user data to move across 2 different legal systems, but you haven't aligned the liability clauses. If something goes wrong, no one is accountable, and that's exactly why the investor is pulling out." Ethan stood frozen behind me. I continued, "And if you sign this version, not only do you lose the deal, you could be facing litigation within 6 months." No one said a word. Gabriella finally asked slowly, "You read all of this?" I met her gaze calm. "No, I analyzed it. If you've ever been underestimated, and then had to speak up to change everything, leave a comment too." No one argued. No one interrupted. The room, which had been loud just minutes ago, was now filled with a heavy silence. One of the lawyers leaned closer to the screen, rereading the clause I had pointed out. A few seconds later he looked up, his expression completely changed. "She's right." That sentence was the breaking point. Gabriella was still looking at me, but this time it wasn't judgment. It was recalculation. "Then what's the solution?" she asked, her voice slower, more careful. I pulled out a chair and sat down, For the first time, no one stopped me from being part of this meeting. You need to restructure liability across the two legal systems, I said, and align the data protection clauses with federal standards. But even if you fix that, it still won't be enough. I opened another file. There are 3 clauses in the prenup you had me sign that are unenforceable under Texas law, if applied alongside your current financial structure. Ethan froze. Gabriella said nothing. But I could see it clearly. She had just realized something she had never considered before. I hadn't just read their contract. I had read the way they were trying to control me. Gabriella didn't react immediately, but I could see the exact moment she understood. Everything she had set up from the beginning was no longer certain. I want to hear this clearly, she said, her voice low but firm. I nodded and pulled the screen closer. Your prenup is built on the assumption that Ethan's personal finances and the company's ecosystem are completely separate, I began. But in reality, once this Series B deal goes through, the ownership structure changes. Cash flow, equity, and control all become tightly interconnected. I scrolled to the next page. That makes 3 key clauses. Those related to asset division, data access rights, and legal liability, unenforceable under Texas law when applied to this structure. One of the lawyers cut in. If that's the case, we could face counterclaims if we keep this setup. I nodded. More than that, in the event of a dispute, the entire prenup could be invalidated. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't panic, it was realization. Gabriella leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on me. How long have you known this? I didn't hesitate. Before I signed. Not the moment I put pen to paper, but from the moment I understood, they were playing a game they believed only they knew the rules to. No one said another word for a few seconds. But everything in the room had changed. No one looked at me as an outsider anymore, but as an essential part of the very problem they were trying to solve. Ethan was the first to break the silence. He stepped closer to me, his eyes no longer uncertain, but aware. Can you fix it? I looked at him for a second, then nodded. For the next 36 hours, I barely left my desk. I rewrote the clause structure, realigned the entire data liability framework, and adjusted how ownership rights were connected to ensure legal compliance. It wasn't patchwork, it was a rebuild from the ground up. The lawyers began following my direction. No one asked who I was anymore. In the final hour, the revised contract was sent back to the investors. Silence stretched for nearly an hour. Then Ethan's phone rang. He answered, said very little, just a few short responses. When he hung up, he turned to me. They're back. The deal was saved. Not perfect, but solid enough to move forward. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling for the first time in 2 days. As for Gabriella, she said nothing. But this time, she no longer looked at me like a variable that needed to be controlled. After that call, the room slowly grew quiet again. No more tense debates, no more doubtful looks. Everything ended, not with a loud victory, but with a very clear shift. Gabriella stood up and began gathering her documents. As she walked past me, she paused for a second. No apology, no explanation. Just a slight nod, a small gesture, but enough to show she had reevaluated everything. Ethan sat down beside me, this time without any distance between us. I didn't understand you, he said, his voice lower. I didn't blame him, because sometimes people don't change when you explain things to them. They change when they finally see for themselves. In the days that followed, Gabriella no longer interfered in our lives the way she used to. Not because she lost control, but because she understood that some people can't be controlled by paperwork or carefully written clauses. As for me, I didn't see what happened as a confrontation, just a moment when everything returned to where it truly belonged. If you've stayed this long, thank you for listening to this story. With so much content out there, the fact that you made it to the end means more than you might think. And if you want to keep following stories like this, stories where the truth always lies beneath what people choose to show, go ahead and subscribe, because the next story might be something you never see coming.